Welcome to Toy Time with Ricky and
Rachel.
Today we'll be talking about the differences between arousal styles and the difference between desire and arousal. I actually had no idea up until I met Rachel that first of all there is
a distinction.
There's a difference, and that there's different types and kinds and et cetera, et cetera. So let's get into it because this is actually probably one of the most interesting things. When it comes to sex and everything. So
our sexuality, our sexual response, who we are, as a sexual being. If we don't have an understanding of how our minds work, how our bodies work, then we're just kind of like walking in blind.
Right, like what is that physical thing that's going on?
Exactly.
Like why is it that they're feeling it and I'm not?
Sure.
Or why is it that I'm feeling it and they're not?
Right.
And why? How can I respond appropriately?
Sure. Well, do you know the difference between desire and arousal?
Well, now I do.
Now you
So I do, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
So desire is, and best way to explain it is desire is more of like the mental part. Like do I want this right now? And arousal is the more of the physical response, right? Where arousal is, the actual. What does it take to trigger that physical response?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So a lot of people, again, in our society, right, we kind of lump a bunch of things together. And so we think that desire and arousal, we use those terms interchangeably, right? When the reality is desire talks about our mental, emotional wanting of sex, and arousal is our physiological response to a sexual stimuli, right? What a lot of people don't know is that we can have one without the other and we can have one before the other, right? So one without the other indicates a little bit of a disconnect between our minds and our bodies, and that can be for a bunch of different reasons. And so, as we age, our bodies start to slow down. So maybe there's a mental emotional wanting, but then our bodies just isn't responding in the way that we're used to, right? And that can create some frustration. And then the other side of that, we actually notice in sexual trauma where the body will become physiologically aroused even if there's not the mental emotional wanting. So that's why we can kind of feel betrayed by our bodies in that way, right? But that's why it's so important to understand that there are two distinct processes between our minds and our bodies.
Yeah, no, and one thing that I've had similar concepts I use in, like, for example, here in the store.
Yeah.
Like I'm training people and I tell them, like, there's different kinds of buyers, right? There's an expressive buyer, they're very emotionally based, they're very impulsive. There's amiable, right, where they're not egocentric, that's not worrying about themselves or worry about somebody else.
Sure.
Still emotional.
Yeah.
There's analytical, that one's self-explanatory. And then driver, they're all about control.
Yeah.
But the important thing that I try to tell folks is that, first of all, these are lenses.
Sure.
So it's not that this person is this thing.
Right.
It's just that in order for me to understand what's going on right now and kind of just to help me, just a quick tool, quick rule of thumb, just so that I could, where to go next. I kind of go, okay, this person right now is amiable. It seems like they're worried about somebody else. Okay. All right. And then I respond accordingly. So it's not that this person is this kind of person. It's not a final judgment on who this person is. It's just, it just helps me understand, and process who this person is. It's just a lens.
Right. Well, what is their motivation or what is their intention?
Right. Like,
and
why?
Let's speak to whatever pathway that they're looking for. Right.
Exactly.
And pathway, I think, is what we're highlighting here when we're talking about different desire styles and different arousal styles. So if we're taking into consideration that with desire and arousal, we can have one without the other, and then we can also have one before the other. And one before the other indicates our desire style. And the research shows that there's actually two distinctly different styles of desire. However, our society only shows us one, right? And the one that society tends to show us, whether it's movies or music or social media or, is what we tend to call spontaneous desire. Spontaneous desire is when we have the mental, emotional wanting of sex first, and then our bodies might respond very quickly thereafter, right? So, and it can also seem simultaneous, right? So I think, therefore I do, yeah?
Right.
So these are the people that tend to initiate sex more often because sex is more so on the forefront of their mind.
Like it's always there. Like it's kind of just what people try and describe as like men. Like we're always ready to go, pretty much. It's like that. It's like in that movie, you know,
Yeah.
you're in a bookstore, you know, you look
Exactly.
up, you just look across the aisle, you kind of just give each other that
Yeah.
thing, you run to the
And,
bathroom
ooh,
real
we're
quick.
ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's spontaneous.
That we consider to be spontaneous
Yeah,
desire.
everybody knows what that is.
Yeah, exactly. But what a lot of people don't know is that that's only about half of people.
Right.
The other half of people experience the exact opposite.
Okay.
And we call it responsive desire.
Okay.
Responsive desire is when we need the physiological arousal first, and then the mental, emotional wanting of sex comes after. So these are the people that aren't initiating sex because it's not on the forefront of their mind, but these are the people that either during sex or after sex will say, oh wow, that was great. I don't know why I don't want that more often.
Right.
And they don't know why because they don't know there's a distinctly different style of desire that nobody has told them about. So they don't know how to really
So it's about
incorporate
mindset.
that.
It's
Exactly.
about mindset. Like,
Yeah.
is this person? Yeah. So it's either spontaneous or responsive. You know, like, am I ready right now, or
Right.
will I be ready? You know, like, will.
Exactly. And so the research does show that men tend to be or have a little bit more of that spontaneous desire style, while women tend to have more of that responsive desire style. But that's definitely not a hard and fast rule. I know plenty of men that have responsive desire, and those are actually the harder cases because there is this assumption that men should just be ready, right?
Right.
And so if some men have responsive desire, then it can kind of feel like, well, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. You
No, and
just have to take a different pathway.
Actually, that's actually a great
Yeah.
thing you mentioned. Like, I have had customers,
Yeah.
you know, ladies, where they talk about their male partner, and they're
Sure.
like, he doesn't wanna whatever, and I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe right now, and to your point, what you said earlier, as we get older, our bodies change,
Sure.
our mindsets change.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe, you know, for people in their relationships, especially, you know, towards the guy.
Sure.
You know, like, if there's a lady that she's frustrated with her gentleman, you know, and he's just not. He used to be so, you know, and he's
Yeah.
not. Maybe that's what it is that he's now in a responsive
Exactly.
desire kind of place where
Exactly.
he
Needs
needs
the
that physical
stimulation.
workup. Yeah.
Yeah. We need the stimulation. We need the sense of arousal, right? In order for then that switch to kind of go off. So I think about spontaneous desire kind of like a typical light switch, right? Flick on, flick off kind of thing. But with responsive desire, it's kind of like that dimmer switch where we have to like edge it up. And then if anything happens in that time that we might not like, then it edges back down and we got to start that process over. And so some people will be like, oh, it's just so much work, right?
Right.
But if we recognize that this is actually a time for us to play, then we don't have to
Yeah,
get
no,
so
and that's
frustrated.
yeah,
around
that's
it.
that whole thing of like, I just did the dishes. My mom is complaining to me about something. Blah blah blah. Like,
Yeah.
you're just not
Not,
there.
nope.
Yeah, and some guys, like, for example, I've had guys where, you know, like, I'm 27, you know, so I'm on the young end of the spectrum, but I've had friends that they're like, man, I just couldn't get it up that one time, blah blah blah, and I tell them, I'm like, that's fine.
Exactly.
Like, you know, helping them.
Normalize.
Yeah, it's fine. That
Yeah.
happens. Like, it's
Yeah.
whether you're responsive or spontaneous,
Yeah.
is fine. It's just like what I was trying to say earlier. It's just about identifying that.
Exactly.
And then knowing how to move forward. You know, like,
Exactly.
how to go to the next step.
Yeah, we have to. Just because you might have different desire styles does not mean you're incompatible. And that's the question that I get often, right? Like, well, if they're this way and I'm that way, then how is it going to work? Well, we just have to learn how to incorporate it, right? So the idea is that the partner with spontaneous desire has to allow time for the responsive partner to catch up.
Right.
While the responsive partner actually has to learn the distinction between, or the threshold where, you know, today, absolutely not. I'm exhausted. I have all these things going on. I had to wake up early and now I'm getting to bed late. Like, I'm just not even in the mood, right? And even people with spontaneous desire have times where they're not in the mood, right?
Right.
Or like, this is a hard no, right? Versus the times where just because I'm not thinking about it or just because I'm not in the mood doesn't mean that I can't be open, right?
Right. No, you gotta. Yeah. There's just people that they gotta work up to it. So that is
Exactly.
is that where the arousal part comes in for? So
Right, exactly.
folks that are spontaneous, they're already there. They're ready to go.
Yeah, they
so they're
can-
arousal. They're already aroused.
Right, and well, there's also certain things that probably activate that arousal,
Right.
right?
So
And
I
so
see.
it's
Okay.
it's the same for spontaneous and responsive desire styles, where we all have different things that activate us, right, and lead to that that arousal and that stimulation, right? Because we have different preferences, and so if we're recognizing that okay, spontaneous desire, they just have more access to it. Whereas responsive desire, you have to really kind of start from that place of willingness versus wanting. So a lot of times in relationships where, the spontaneous partner might ask, do you want to have sex, right? And if the responsive partner is being honest, no, I don't want to have sex.
Yeah, and the spontaneous one feels turned down,
exactly,
or the responsive one feels like they have
why don't
to.
they want to, and then the obligation, and then all of that, right? So if we shift the question, if we change the question to are you open versus do you want?
Are you available?
Yeah.
Right.
Are you open to having this experience with me? Is there, do you have the time and the space, or can we work into it, right?
Yeah, and
Where
that's the kind of
for that
consideration. That's the kind of thing that that makes sex better. That we last episode we talked about foreplay and that kind of thing, and consideration for your partner.
Yes.
What at the end of the day, generally speaking, what is foreplay? And it's that time where you consider the other person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in this case, when it comes to desire,
right.
It's about, are you open? Are you available? Are you willing to accept this situation right now?
Yeah.
Are you in the
Whatever.
mindset? Are you
Exactly. And so then on the other side of it, we also have to know what is it that we actually need, or that helps us to kind of experience that stimulation and arousal, and that thing that actually turns us on, right?
No, and let's say you're right now in a responsive set, like where you're kind of deactivated, so to speak. How do we activate you? How do we get there? That's what arousal is, right?
Yes.
Like how to, and the different kinds of arousal styles.
Exactly.
Right.
And so the research shows that there's actually 4 distinctly different styles of arousal, right? So remember, arousal is a physiological response, yeah? And so we have the seductive style. And so the seductive style are the people that really like those kind of highly erotic experiences, right? So it's
like
about
the sex
passion. Yeah, it's about the passion, the adventure, the thrill. Like, how many things do we have in our sex box?
They like to be wanted, like that jewel, that I'm the prettiest girl at the dance kind of thing. Like whisked off their feet, like that whole.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Yes, that, and it's like, okay, well, maybe some of that role play, or we are bringing in some like specific tools or toys, right? And so it's like those highly kind of erotic, highly what we would kind of consider to be like those sexual contexts.
Yeah, and is it that, like, for example, a challenge to that is somebody who has that that arousal style, they don't feel that way. Right? So maybe that's what gets them going, feeling like they're that sex pot, that center of that person's desire, etc. But what can happen is that person doesn't feel that way for whatever reason. Although you're telling them, no, you're this, you're on your knees and you're drooling. They don't feel that way.
Well,
so that's what I'm trying to say is that's part of it. Sometimes our perspective can get flipped. And like, for example, as a guy, I feel like I've had ladies that, I'm like, oh my God, you're so this, you're so hot or whatever. And they're like, I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel that way. So I'm not that way right now.
Well, they might not be receptive to that, right? So if they're not responding to that, then maybe that's not their arousal style.
Okay.
Right?
So that goes back to the desire, the mindset part.
Right. Yeah. And so you might respond in a way of like, oh, like, you're so beautiful, you're so sexy, I want to, these are all the things that I want to do to you, right? But then if that's not their pathway to access desire and arousal, then they're not going to respond.
I see. So the arousal is kind of like once this person is in a position of desire where they're ready
to receive.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
A place to receive whatever is being offered, but when I say whatever is being offered, it has to be specific to what you need, right? And that might be different than what your partner needs, and that's where we have to make those accommodations.
Right.
So when we're able to recognize, okay, I have this style of desire and I have this style of arousal, then that's when we create a little bit more of a clear roadmap to, okay, well, this is what you need, this is what I need, so this is what we're going to incorporate and be intentional about incorporating into these intimate and sexual experiences, right? So if we go back, we have for the 4 different styles of arousal, right? One of them is the seductive style that I think is what society shows us. Then we also have a sentimental style. The sentimental style are the people that really value the emotional connection. So they get turned on through conversation and through feeling like, oh, my partner is really paying attention to me and really wants to know about my day. And they're being vulnerable and they're sharing, and I'm like getting to know them so much more. And that just really turns me on.
So it's more about the brain, you know, like what's the mind, you know, that mind meld, you know, that telepathic communication, you know, that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
so it's how much do you care about me?
Exactly.
You know, how, you know, what.
Or
what,
do you care about me, right?
Right, do you appreciate me?
Exactly.
You know, like, did you think about me today?
Right, yeah. So maybe these are the people that are, as you were talking about, oh, you know, you're so sexy, but this is kind of maybe like doting of like, oh, let me take care of you, let me, you know, like you're my princess or whatever, you know, maybe it's something like that kind of
thing.
Yeah. So then we also have the surrender style. The surrender style has to do more with that power play, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to dive into the world of like kink and BDSM and those types of things, which we'll cover in you know, future episodes, but it has to do with this kind of sense of control, right? I work with a lot of women, like high power women, entrepreneurs, high in the corporate ladder, and they have to be so on all the time that sexually they're like, I don't want to do anything, right? Like I just want my partner to take me and to just tell me what to do and tell me, you know, how they want me, right? And so that surrender style speaks to, do you want to be a little bit more dominant? Do you want to be a little bit more submissive, right?
I see.
Do you want to be taken, or do you want to take control?
And is this more to do with the kinds of play somebody likes, or is this,
yeah.
or has this more to do with once somebody's in that position where they're ready to receive, like, does that question make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that's what we're going to be covering here,
right?
Like, if you understand your arousal style, then all the different topics that we're going to be diving into through this podcast is going to be touching on the different arousal styles and the different pathways that you can take. So if you don't know what your arousal style is, then you can kind of explore some of the options that we're going to be sharing with you so that you can start to tap in and tune in to actually,
So the arousal style has more to do with really who you are, you know, like the context of your life. You know,
how
like
you respond sexually.
Right. Okay, interesting. Like what is it that makes you tick?
Right.
Like what is it that specifically about all the different kinds of play?
Yes.
What is it
that does it for you?
Right.
Yes.
Interesting. So that's what at the end of the day an arousal style is.
Exactly.
It's like whether you're doing BDSM or role play or whatever, you're generally going to follow this kind of arousal, like this kind of...
Right, exactly, yeah. And this comes from research from an incredible researcher out of Canada. Her name is Petra Zebroff?
Yeah.
Yeah, Petra Zebroff. And so you can go
She's actually the one I found. Like when I looked up all the arousal styles, she's the one that,
Yeah, well, because she's the only one. I mean, we have to take into consideration that research around sex and sexuality really, the foundations of it really started in the 50s and 60s, right? So we're talking about one generation, essentially.
Yeah, you had mentioned before that it's like the clitoris.
Oh,
like that's what I don't know if you guys can see it, that little yellow thing we've been having in the front.
Don't tell them what it is. Don't tell them what it is. We're going to sneak peek.
Okay. But that they haven't been using, that the model of the clitoris was updated only 20 years ago?
Yeah. It's it's incredible. So I think we're going to touch on that when we talk about vibrators, because that's what's most important to know, and I think that's going to be our next episode. So that's a good segue.
But it's only right just now coming out of, from under the rock, so to speak.
Exactly. So we're just now in like our generation really learning the differences between not only the genders, right, but how different we are as sexual beings, and recognizing that there's not just one way. So in our first episode, when we're talking about foreplay and really expanding and redefining even what sex and intimacy is, right, there's another incredible researcher. Her name is Peggy Kleinplatz. She's also out of Canada, and all of the great researchers, sex research right now, are out of Canada, which tells you something.
Or out of the U.S.
Exactly, not out of the U.S., And so she wrote a book called Magnificent Sex, and following couples over the long term. When I say long term, like 10, 20, 30, 40 years and ask them, okay, what's helping you to maintain a vibrant sexual relationship?
Right.
And she found 8 key factors. And one of those factors was that these couples were able to throw away everything that they thought they knew about sex so that they could redefine what that means for themselves specifically.
That's actually a great point. I've definitely found that to be the case with people that come in the store.
Yeah.
Like there is a
certain idea, those expectations.
Yeah. There's an association I have in my mind
Yeah.
of like how open and willing an individual or a couple is,
Right.
and how the smile that's on their face.
Sure.
You know, it's. You know what I think of when I think of the happiest couples, you know, where they're chit-chatting, they're running around the store, they're telling stories, they're asking questions, that kind of
curiosity.
where they're really just being free, you know, they're kind of just expressing and whatever. I've definitely found that the couples that are doing that are the ones that are expressing that openness. Like, you know, they came in here with an honesty and you know, they're like, I don't, or, you know, they're ready to say, I don't know.
Right.
You know, they're ready to ask a question.
Yeah. And that curiosity, and that's something that we probably should have talked about in the first episode of that communication. It's that curiosity that draws us in, right? It's the assumptions. As soon as we start making assumptions about our partners or about, you know, what's supposed to happen here is where that's really the beginning of the disconnect, is those assumptions and the expectations, right? It's when we can maintain an air of curiosity. That's what draws us in, you know?
So it's experimenting.
Exactly.
Is what it is. It's instead of assuming the answer or assuming, you know, whatever the result would be, like in this, or whatever the reaction would be in this, you know, in this, if I'm mixing these chemicals, what happens?
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of going, oh, this is what's going to happen.
No,
you know,
it's
and assuming,
being open to whatever.
I don't know what the answer is going to be.
Exactly, and that's a part of the fun. That's part of the fun.
Right.
So going back, because remember the 2 different desire styles, spontaneous versus responsive desire, and then the 4 different arousal styles.
Yes, we've done seductive, sentimental,
surrender,
and
then the last one is sensational.
So
this one has to do with the senses. So these are the people that really need to kind of be immersed into the experience, right? So
touch,
smell, sound. What are the visuals, as we were talking about in the foreplay episode, right?
Right.
And so what type of, or which one of your senses do you find most erotic or arousing or sexual, right? Because it's different for all of us. Where, I mean, the research does show that men tend to be a little bit more visual, while women tend to need a little bit more of the stimulation in terms of different senses being incorporated, right? So not just the visual, but that physical touch and maybe the auditory and
like
and
are
maybe
these sheets
taking in
are these nice sheets or
does
shitty
it
sheets?
feel soft,
you know, like are they
right?
high thread count
Exactly,
or like
exactly. And what type of cologne are you wearing, right?
Right.
Like, can I just kind of like take you in?
Yeah, no,
in
and I
that
feel like
sense?
for guys that's so, you know, that whole thing of like, oh my God, you smell so good. I'm sure some guys can relate, you know, like they smell a girl or something and they go, oh my God, like they're intoxicated by that smell. But for some other guys, like for me, that took me a second to you know, like, that smell, sensation, senses. That something besides what somebody looks like is what matters, you know, like something, you know, like I got better sheets, you know, and like, and it may be weird for some. You know, but for others, they'll fully go, yeah, totally, like the nice sheets that made the sex better.
That made the exactly.
Yeah. So
that one candle where it's like, oh, that smell, or that playlist that just really got me going, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's what play is for a lot of folks, you know, is maybe they don't know what their arousal style is, and that's okay. You know, like it's not.
But this is where it's important for you to explore. Like these conversations that we're having, it's all intended for you to expand and explore so that you can see what's best for you.
Exactly. So and that's kind of the point I was making earlier, that it's not, let's say, you know, it's not that there's something different or something, you know, wrong with being a spontaneous versus responsive or being seductive versus sensational. No, it's just
none is better or worse than the other.
It's a lens to process yourself. You know, much like astrology. You know, that's like, you know, being a Capricorn or this or that. You know, it's a way for you to understand yourself.
Exactly.
You know, it's and that's what
Gives
these
you a little
things.
bit of a framework.
Now,
And so that's
I have
the
a
idea.
question for
Yeah.
you. So, like, what I think about often when we talk about like all these different kinds of styles is like the love languages thing.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah,
like
yeah.
the words of gratitude, the gift, quality time,
Sure.
et cetera, where they
Yeah.
say that it's not that you're one and you're that one, whatever. It's that you're this one most, and then
Exactly.
you kind of
That's
go down.
exactly
Is
it.
it the same with
Yes.
arousal styles?
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah. So if you go on Dr. Zebroff's website, I believe it's called The Art of Connection is her website. And so you can take the assessment, and basically what it is it breaks it down of like you're 65% in this category and maybe 2% in this category. So
Right.
it gives you a little bit of a roadmap of like,
Okay.
hey, these are the things that do it for me more than this thing. It doesn't mean that I can't enjoy this thing over here, but
Right.
it might not just kind of turn me on in the way that this thing would, you know?
Yeah, no, and I've definitely had customers where like I'm gonna promote that a lot more here in the store. I've had
Yeah.
customers where I could tell that's a disconnect.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
where they're a little lost in the bedroom. They don't know what to do
Yeah.
next. They
Right.
don't know what they're kind of a little lost for
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And it's just I something like that, understanding their arousal style.
Exactly.
You know, and like I said, and you help me understand this, you know, where let's say your arousal style is the seductive type.
Sure.
You know, where you like being the center of attention, so to speak,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, the
Yeah.
sex pot.
Yeah.
You know, there's all sorts of different kinds of play, like for example, BDSM, role play. You know, where you could play with those,
Exactly.
right? But pay attention and consider that arousal style.
Right. And take into consideration that your partner might not have that style. So it really is about accommodating for both, right? So maybe one sexual experience you can bring in what the both of you want. Maybe the next experience is dedicated to one partner and
Right.
what they
Right.
really like. And then the experience after that is catered to the other partner, right?
Right.
So the idea here is all about mutual pleasure. I think in our first episode we said, you know, let's take the goals out of it. Let's take the expectations out of it, right? Like it doesn't have to end just one way. But if we are taking into consideration that if we need a goal, right, then the idea is mutual pleasure. And so what do you need? What do I need? And what can we do to
Right.
incorporate
Like
these
if
things?
it's in saying that there's no expectations. The
Right.
expectation is
Exactly.
that
We're just here to have fun.
that each person is going to try their best to understand each other,
Yeah.
ask the right questions, look for the right answers,
Get
et cetera, et
curious.
cetera. Yeah.
And be open to exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that wraps up nicely in a little
Yeah,
bow.
yeah.
What we've been talking about. So I like I said, this is probably one of the most fascinating things I've learned about when it comes
Yeah.
to sex and
Our sexuality and our sexual response.
Right. So I'm sure we can keep talking about this forever
Yeah.
and ever. If you, the audience, you know, you guys want to hear more about this, let us know in the comments.
And have any questions. But
Yeah,
in
yeah.
upcoming episodes, we'll be talking about different ways that you can play, you know, in the bedroom, outside of the bedroom. And
Yeah.
all of them are kind of fit into these different arousal styles so that you can start that exploration for yourself.